Everyone, Anne-Marie Matulis here in Southeastern Massachusetts. Welcome to our regular Sunday night SPSM Chat 2.0 reboot. We have a most interesting conversation today. If we could take a poll and I could see all your hands, my guess would be that there's not a person amongst us who doesn't probably need to spend a little more concentrated time with self-care, for sure. But first, I'd like all of our guests and our backup support and Tracy to introduce yourselves. Trace, you want to say hi to everybody?
Hi, everyone. My name is Tracy Medeiros. I'm a suicide attempt survivor and a loss survivor.
Hey, Trace. Lauren?
Hi, my name is Lauren Carter. I'm a suicide loss survivor, and I'm a former journalist and currently work in PR, and I live in Massachusetts.
Lena?
Hi, I'm Lena Heilman. I'm here in Colorado. I'm a suicide loss survivor. I lost my sister to suicide, and I work in suicide prevention.
Thank you. Stephanie?
Hi, I am Stephanie Willard. I'm a loss survivor of a murder-suicide. I'm a licensed acupuncturist by day, and my other hat is I'm an advocate, writer, public speaker, and I'm on the Suicide Prevention Alliance for the state of Oregon. And I'm in Portland, Oregon.
Oregon, yes. So let's see, Massachusetts, Colorado, and Oregon. That's a pretty broad stretch here. So I'm going to jumpstart the conversation for everybody out there. I hope you're following along and that you please introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from, what's going on with you today. I think the question today was, did you deliver any trainings or workshops or some kind of educational piece during the week today? If you did, why don't you tell us about it? So self-care. I'm just going to briefly open it with saying that for a very good chunk of my life, self-care was not something that I did because it was not encouraged. I grew up in a generation where if you suggested that you were going to take time for yourself, it was frowned on. It was frowned on. I was a stay-at-home mom for 16 years as my kids were growing up. I didn't work outside the home. And the thought of self-care was just not on the horizon. I did spend 3 years, though, I have to say, in hatha yoga and long distance running. And I did pretty well at both of them. And I found an incredible peace in the middle of chaos with that self-care, because those of you who do know me know my lived experience began as a battered woman with domestic violence. And both yoga and long distance running helped me shut that out and just find some peace within. And when I left the violence, I did not go back to long distance running. I had done some serious damage to my knees and my ankles, but I did. And I didn't go back to yoga either, except some people really were asking us to do it while I was healing. And it was nice to get back into it, but it wasn't something that I continued to do. And for the next probably 5 years or so, maybe, I did not give one iota of attention to self-care. It wasn't until about 15 years ago that I started to step back into what for me became self-care. And that was when I recognized that if I go a long time, and that could be a week for me, and I haven't been writing, I haven't been doing something creative in that way, or out walking, doing some kind of physical work, not heavy duty walking, just like literally looking around and walking, that I get really, I feel the change. I can feel a tightness inside. I can feel the lack of inner peace. So I became kind of rigid about that. And yet, and Lauren and I were having this conversation on Twitter a little bit, is that it requires constant vigilance to be able to stay focused on self-care that keeps me well. I have that motivation, of course, of the last 12 years working within suicidology, and particularly working with impacted family members like myself. So that's my story on self-care. Trace, you want to tell us what it is that that helps you pull within and get some quiet time?
Yeah, sure. I think the most important thing that really helps me a lot is coloring and riding my motorcycle, of course. You know, there's nothing like it. I'm so glad that I've made that decision, because it just feels like it's just me, the wind, and whatever, you know, and nobody else around me, nobody touches me. Like it's like it's peaceful for me. The other thing is the beach. The beach is where I like to be at least once a week,
You're freezing up, Trace.
getting the vitamin D and stuff. It's where I can sit and gather my thoughts, you know, and, you know, have me be at peace with things. The other thing is, I like to, I've been dabbling in junk journaling lately, which is almost like scrapbooking, but you write a little bit more in it, you know. So I've created that for myself, and I've been doing that.
Cool.
And that's really helpful.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're going to keep an eye on the Twitter chat for us. Let us know if there are any questions. Yes?
Yes, I shall.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So we have 3 guests, and we're going to start and have each of our guests share with them what they were bringing to the table tonight. I hope you find it as fascinating as I did, and I still have a lot to learn from all 3. So we're going to start with Lauren. And Lauren, I'm not ignoring you. I'm just watching the chat if you see me looking down. All right.
Okay.
I am paying attention. All right.
Okay.
Lauren, tell us where you want to go.
So my self-care regimen, I mean, it was basically born out of the fact that, so I've struggled with depression since I was like 14. I faced a lot of adversity in my childhood, and I started, you know, experiencing like severe bouts of depression when I was 14, and they basically continued up until very recently. And so, you know, I had already been struggling with that. I'd been kind of searching for like natural and alternative solutions, and sometimes they would work and sometimes they wouldn't, and I didn't really know why they stopped working or why they worked in the first place. I was just kind of like, you know, searching around in the dark. And then when I was 32, I lost my mom to suicide, and that it just kind of changed everything, because it was like I had sort of gotten used to living with depression and, you know, like figuring out how to kind of like manage around it. But when I lost my mom to suicide, it really changed me. And, you know, the chronic depression on top of dealing with that kind of complex grief, and all the different emotions that come with that, like the anger, the shame, the guilt, the regret, just sort of this pain that wouldn't really go away. Like it was really difficult for me to work through that. And I just found that I was just sort of paralyzed. Like I wasn't really able to move forward. And my only solution really at that point was to kind of like distance myself from myself, to try to sort of not think about what had happened, not think about the past. You know, I'm a writer. I stopped writing. I kind of went into this like totally unrelated field. I couldn't figure out how to really come to terms with what had happened and work through it emotionally. And so I sort of just tried to distance myself from myself. And obviously that is not a workable solution. So I just kind of reached a point where, you know, I kind of hit rock bottom. And I just really felt the need. I was like, I have to figure this out. Like, I can't go on like this any longer. I need to figure out how to take care of myself and how to heal and how to get better. And so I sort of, you know, I ended up putting together a wellness program for myself. I sort of like stumbled into it haphazardly, because I was experiencing a lot of anxiety, just like physical anxiety. Like it was a sensation that I hadn't really felt before. I actually felt like I was physically unraveling. And so I started, you know, I'm a journalist by trade. So I started like researching for solutions, and I ended up coming across these 3 supplements that I ended up getting and using, and those helped me tremendously. And that kind of gave me like a little bit of like hope, or like, you know, a sense of like light at the end of the tunnel. Like, oh, maybe I can do something about the way that I feel. Like, because I was so used to just sort of my emotions being out of my control and the way that I felt being out of my control. And I'd sort of like resigned myself to that. And when I was actually able to address that anxiety and that sort of like sense of loss of control, that gave me some hope. And so I started doing more research. I started, you know, diving really deep into like health and personal development and personal transformation and post-traumatic growth. And then I stumbled on the ketogenic diet. I actually just came across the diet to lose a little bit of weight, because I had taken an office job and, you know, gained a little bit of weight. And so I started doing the diet to lose weight, and my depression ended up subsiding dramatically. And I was like really shocked, because I'd always thought something that was like totally, you know, mental, emotional, psychological. It never occurred to me that there could be like a physical element to it. So once I experienced that change, I started doing like, and then I figured out why I was experiencing that change, because number one, I was kind of coming off of the blood sugar roller coaster, because ketogenic diet, you are lowering your carbs, and you're eating like moderate protein and high fat. And so like I realized like my body was never great at, you know, processing carbs. Got rid of the carbs, got rid of the sugar. I was off that blood sugar roller coaster, that up and down, that I realized was, for me, a lot of what I thought my depression was like blood sugar fluctuations. And then I was giving my body like the healthy fat that it needed, because I had no idea. Like the brain is made of 60 to 70% fat. Cell membranes are made of fat. Hormones are made of fat. I had no idea how important fat was. Once I started eating a lot of healthy fat, I just felt so much better. And I realized that I was kind of healing my brain. And I had never paid any attention or given any thought to my brain before, which is like really sad to say, because it controls so much of our lives. But I had just it never occurred to me that like it was something I needed to pay attention to. So once that helped me, I started doing more research, like what else can I do to help my brain? I started taking more supplements for brain health and gut health. I started meditating. I started meditating every day, because, you know, there's been all kinds of studies done, like meditation has incredibly positive effects on the brain. I started saying positive affirmations. I started getting regular exercise. I'd always kind of poo-pooed exercise as a way to overcome depression. I was like, they don't understand, because my depression was like really severe, and I was like, I'm not going to feel better by exercising. But exercise actually has really powerful effects on the brain. And for me, when I combined it with all the other stuff that I was doing, it kind of intensified the effects of those things. You know, and then I just started like detoxifying my environment. Like I started, you know, just not consuming any food with any sort of like toxins or artificial ingredients. I, you know, got rid of like all my like personal care products with any kind of toxins or anything like that. And I really kind of changed my environment in terms of like who I was surrounding myself with and what sort of messages I was paying attention to. Like I just really started reading and watching and listening only to things that were positive and focused on health and life affirming and focused on, you know, growth and transformation, because I had spent the majority of my life in a state where I was not feeling healthy, not feeling in control, and I just needed to do a 180 and shift my attention and my energy. Like I had to pour all of my energy into healing, you know. And I'm going to wrap this up because I'm sure I'm over time, but, you know, another important thing was just developing a relationship with God for me. And it wasn't about religion at all. It was just, you know, and it's like, you can, you know, we all have our own beliefs. But for me, like through this whole process, I kind of came to know God in a way that I hadn't before. And so that relationship has been important for me. And then just, you know, uncovering my purpose has been really important. So like as a package, like this is kind of the stuff that I do on a regular basis. Like, you know, diet, supplements, meditating, saying positive affirmations, exercising, getting out in nature is huge, vitamin D, you know, and then just really like kind of developing a spiritual life. And that for me, number one, has really helped me heal from the suicide loss, because it was only after doing all this stuff that I was actually able to open up and talk and connect with other people about losing my mom to suicide, which I had suppressed for so long. And it's also helped me to overcome depression, which I never thought would be possible. So that's my self-care in a nutshell.
That's a hell of a nutshell. Thank you. And I have to tell, I want to share with you all that the feed is really rolling. I guess we picked a good subject for the night. I'll look forward, everybody, to seeing all of these on the curation. But wow, thank you all for your comments and in opening up and sharing about how you are managing self-care, or in some cases, I can see still struggling with self-care. Colorado, Lena, are you guys filled with snow still?
Down here it's okay. Up in the mountains it's pretty snowy.
Okay, all right. The floor is yours.
Great. All right. Well, hi, my name is Lena Heilman. I'm a suicide loss survivor. I lost my sister Danielle to suicide 6 years ago, and I'm calling in from Colorado today. I think, Emery, you wanted me to talk about self-care after suicide loss and focus on sleep hygiene. So I'm going to do that for the next 5 or so minutes. Mm-hmm. Self-care has been really important for me since losing my sister for different reasons. But before I go into self-care, I want to just spend a moment and talk about the way that we talk about self-care as a society, which I think can be a little bit problematic. So I just want to kind of frame that first, which is talking about how self-care, I think, is often a way that we talk about privilege and access, and it's not often equitable, and it's not often framed as a social justice issue. And I want to just take a moment and step back and say a lot of times the way that we talk about self-care really is rooted in extreme privilege and who has the money to buy things that are related to self-care, who has the time to engage in self-care. And sometimes I think the narrative about self-care really is do self-care, do these things, take a bath, eat healthy food, go regularly to a doctor. And these are not privileges that everyone has access to. Mm-hmm. And so I always want to be really careful when we're talking about self-care, that we're just aware that a lot of people don't have basic access to the things that we're saying people should do. So I think there's always a social justice issue that we need to be cognizant of as we're talking through it. That being said, there's a lot of self-care that I am able to do, and I'm really grateful for a lot of those privileges. For example, for me, it's really important to get outside as much as possible. Mm-hmm. And I'm lucky that I live in Colorado and I'm able to go into the mountains and be in the fresh air and do athletic things and get natural light. And that's really tremendous for me too. I think the same, eating healthy is important for me, getting nutrients and eating as cleanly as possible. But again, those are things that are really lucky to have. I know not everybody can. I think self-care for me really at its root is learning how to advocate for myself and set my own boundaries and hold to them, whatever they are, and not feel ashamed about my boundaries, not feel guilty about them, and just stand really firm and say, this is what I need. And I know that's what I need. And that relates back to my grief, because I think my sister was always the person who was on my side, and she was always the one that was standing up for me. I knew no matter what happened, she had my back. And when she died, I felt really lonely. Who would have my back in that same way? And I learned one of the things I need to do in my grief is I need to be my sister's voice, standing up for me. And so taking that step to really just draw my hard lines and hold firm to them is really what informs all of my self-care. I've always struggled with insomnia. That's not something that I've ever really had an easy time with. When I was younger, I had a lot of nightmares, kind of spiraled into questions of what is death, what is eternity, that would keep me up. After my sister died, I really, a lot of the trauma responses came up thinking about, what her death meant and playing it over and over again on loop, and it's kind of caused a whole new level of insomnia that I've had to try to deal with. And I try to do so as naturally as possible, which means that I have a really intense sleep hygiene ritual, and I think I could spend hours going into it. But I just want to draw out a few of the points that I do that are really helpful for me. One thing I do is I turn off the blue light filters on all my gadgets. I know some people say no phones right before bed. For me, that's not really an option. I like to be connected. I get lonely, so I want to have phones on and watch TV, but I will have the blue light filter. I also have a routine that works for me, and whatever that routine is that works for someone, I think having a routine can be really helpful if it's appropriate for someone's lifestyle. But for me, knowing I have a routine and prioritizing that, and again, that goes to my boundaries, that's really helpful too. Also, I try my best to watch the sunrise and the sunset every single day. I think that's important for my self-clock. I had a professional back in my early 20s who told me that I should watch the sunrise, and I almost walked out of the office. I was like, I can never wake up for the sunrise. That's impossible. I was not a morning person. I don't think I'd ever really seen a sunrise at that point. But I guess one of the benefits of having insomnia, especially early morning insomnia, is I'm usually awake before the sun. So I'm able to watch the sunrise, and I try to watch it set. And that kind of regulates my body clock a little bit more too. Also, in order to stay asleep, I sleep with a sleeping mask and earplugs, and kind of allowing a little bit of that hibernation, blocking off sounds and sensations helps me stay asleep as much as possible. So I have a lot of other little things, but I think the core components that I think if someone else is interested in kind of practicing some sleep hygiene, those are, I think, some good places to start. And then just finally, I want to give a shout out to the book, The End of Night, which I read, and I think is a really interesting book that talks about the way that humans are losing access to the natural dark sky and what that means for us. But what I really like about that book too is there is framing in terms of social justice. Who has access to night sky? Who has access to darkness at night? Who is able to have a sleeping schedule that is regular with the rest of society?
Yeah.
I just really think, again, that even sleep hygiene is rooted in extreme privilege. But I think sleep and access to sleep should be a human right. And I think we should all be able to have that sleep, because I know it's so fundamental to physical health and mental health. And it, I think, has a really strong connection to suicide and suicide prevention as well.
I was smiling because for 7 years I rented a home here in Taunton. Live in a beautiful place right now, but this was on the lake, and as I would wake up, the sun would be rising across the lake. And so again, for those 7 years, I started to get very comfortable with of doing just that, of almost without an alarm, be up. It was a lake that was filled with wildlife, swans, watching the swans, watching all of the other wildlife that would be around there. That was how I would start my day. And I was always happy the days that I got home so I could go just sit in my office chair and just look out at the sunset. And the colors that it would bring into the back porch area and into those rooms it just became part of my life. And you're right, looking back, who would have thought that I would have had the ability to be in a location like that, first of all, to be able to be renting a house. Because when I grew up, and I mean this, and when you use the term social justice, and I think about how the society that I grew up in did not approve or support self-care. I mean, you just didn't do that. You just, and no one ever said why. You know, it was considered selfish and frivolous. It would be like saying, when I grew up as a child, that would be like saying, I want to grow up to be a writer. And they said, well, no, what's the real job you're going to have? That kind of approach to it. And so it took me a long time when I got out of the violence to recognize that it was okay to want to take care of myself. But at that time, for those first 7 years or so, I went from that, an atmosphere of clear affluence, to feed on the street. Would I have a meal the next night? And actually at one point being homeless. And that's why I reverted back to walking because it was the one thing I could do, and it didn't cost me anything to be able to do that. And I started to take advantage of libraries because I couldn't have all the books that I would love to have. So I appreciate, because when I first saw the terminology, I thought, I want to hear what Lena's going to say about this. And now I fully understand. And you're right. It's so easy to take for granted. Oh, we'll go to a yoga class. Well, you know, how much money is that going to cost me? And so you're right. We need to be very careful about how we have this conversation before we use the word should to anybody in self-care. So thank you so much for, wow. Now I need to watch what I eat and think about my sleep hygiene. My sleep patterns suck, you know, and I know that, but I will confess, I have gotten much better. About 3 years ago, I said, enough is enough. You cannot burn the candle on both ends. Get yourself to bed. And so I started to be much more consistent about doing that. Stephanie, ta-da-da, your turn.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm glad to hear that you're doing better with your sleep, Anne-Marie. We've had conversations about them.
Yes, we did. Stephanie was with us for a few days, a year and a half ago, and she picked right up on that lack of sleep pattern immediately. And I had some, not to mention the Diet Coke that's still over on the other side of the room. Yes. Okay. Your turn.
Well, a bit of background on me is that in May of 2014, my late husband's brain broke, and he killed our 4-year-old daughter, Marabella, and then himself. So after that, like any person, I went into a state of shock and grief that I can't even, it rocked my world. I pretty much wanted to crawl in bed and never come out again, but I had my kid, Oliver, who was 9 at the time, and he needed me. I will say that I am lucky in the fact that I'm an acupuncturist by trade, and I had 18 years of knowledge and self-care already under my belt. That was part of my natural day-to-day. So I pride myself in walking my talk with my patients, and I live by example as much as possible. And at that time when my life was completely out of control, which is often what happens after a trauma like this, I tried to grasp onto anything that I could to regain control. And self-care was one of them. One of my favorite things that I have to my patients is when life gets overwhelming is control that which you can control. And I love, Lena, how you talked about how that, how society has interesting connotations around that. And so I pretty much say get down to basics when I feel overwhelmed. And it's like, I do have my list of things of self-care, but then I check in and say, what are my basics? Water, food, sleep, water, food, sleep. And water is pretty straightforward. But like Anne-Marie and I talked about with her Diet Coke, you know, like if you drink an entire 2-liter thing of Diet Coke and maybe a couple glasses of water, that balance is off. But again, I say like water is one of those things that I can control. And it really, they've done some really interesting experiments on depression and water intake. And when people are really low on water intake, depression can pick up. And we've all talked about diet. Oriental medicine looks at diet and how it affects your body in a really interesting way and how it affects depression. And, you know, more and more studies have come out on that, how, you know, serotonin receptors in the gut. And so it kind of feeds back onto that loop on the Oriental medicine take on that. So I do my best in terms of eating a balanced diet anyway, and I generally feel like crap when I don't. So again, like it doesn't have to be ornate, but again, looking at that balance within my day-to-day, am I getting the right balance of carbs, veggies, fruits, proteins, and, you know, again, basics. You know, I feel you on the sleep. Sleep is challenging. It was challenging after my firstborn. It is challenging after this trauma 5 years later. It just went from poor to crap. And I try to engage in the healthy sleep habits that I can. I do try to limit my phone before bed. And that blue light is really critical in terms of your brain waking up versus not. And I think the thing is, I try to be in bed 8 to 9 hours a night. Whether I sleep during that whole time is a whole nother question, but I am generally in bed for 8 to 9 hours a night. And if I do have insomnia in the middle of the night, I try to do some deep breathing. What I don't do is I don't get up. I don't look at my phone. I keep my room dark. I have a noise machine. So I try to engage in all those healthy habits that I can. And generally, if I'm in that 8 to 9 hour window, then at least I'm rested. I wouldn't say I'm up in one of these morning people that says, oh, wow, the world is happening now, and I'm excited about that. Going beyond these basics for me, I incorporate a lot of clinical aromatherapy in my practice, and they have some amazing benefits in terms of helping with anxiety and depression and PTSD. So again, those are in my day-to-days when I'm at work, and I brought a whole bunch home to help me in the meantime. And exercise for me, and again, this is different for everybody. Before Jesse and Bella died, I was learning how to jog and I walked. But after they died, I felt like I was pretty much crawling out of my skin most of the time. So I started to run, and it's one of those very few things when I'm crawling out of my skin and I have all this emotion and energy that's just kind of like boiling up inside. If I go run, it helps it. It doesn't make it go away, but it does help diffuse it. My mom died of alcoholism, and I have to watch that balance. And I really recognize the rabbit hole after a traumatic loss like this and of substance abuse. So I have this everyday movie reel of what I walked in on that night, and it goes over and over in my head. So I then had to deal with a PTSD, depression, and anxiety that I never had in my life to that degree. I dealt with depression on and off, but never to that degree. And I was in a lot of pain and wanted nothing more than for it to stop. So I knew that there was a huge possibility because of my mom that I could become addicted very easily. So I won't say that I don't have a completely clean diet, because I do like a good glass of scotch, and I live in the Pacific Northwest and I love craft beer, but I am very honest with myself and I keep myself in check. I can see how easy that would be to get out of control really easily. Therapy has been critical for me. I went for a while, then stopped, and then this past year realized with a lot of stuff that was happening, I needed to go again. And I imagine that's going to be an on and off for the rest of my life. Self-compassion is and still is one of the hardest things for me. I'm from New York originally, and I'm a type A overachiever. And I never asked for help before in my life, or very little. After Jesse and Bella died, I had to learn to ask for help because I really needed it. And I have to remind myself on a day-to-day basis how much their death has taken out of me and continues to take out of me. You're in this hypervigilant state all the time, and you're always looking to see like what's going to happen. Am I going to go to a grocery store and am I going to see a little girl that looks like Bella? So I'm on this hypervigilance, and that takes a lot out of me. So like my normal to-do list that were 2 pages long went down to a quarter of a page, and I had to be, I've had to still learn to be okay with that and say, okay, I have this list. What do I need to actually get done today? And then work. I treat patients, and I used to work 4 days a week and see, 30, 35 patients a week. And that I couldn't do anymore. Like, I really pride myself in coming home at the end of the day and knowing it made a difference in people's lives. And for me to continue to be able to do that, I had to go down to 2 days a week. So that has been critical. and a huge financial strain because self-employed people, if they don't work, they don't get paid. Yeah. Memory's waving right now. Part of my self-care has also been diving into advocacy work and giving back where I can and sharing my story, because people who have had murder-suicide, they're in the periphery of things, and they need a lot of unique support. So sharing and educating others on this has been a passion, and it's part of my self-care because I feel like I can give back. And I think lastly, I just want to say, listen to your body. Self-care looks different for every single person, but I truly try to train my patients, like, listen to your body, because it's really has this innate intelligence that it's trying to communicate to you. Personally, last year, I started getting really short of breath, and in my runs, I couldn't even run 3 miles. And I've done like 3 half marathons since they died. And I was like, this isn't right. But it wasn't, like being versed in panic attacks. So I was like, maybe it's just that. And it got progressively worse. And I took myself to the doctor, and I said, something's not right, because I don't generally go to doctors. And he's like, you're in perfect health, And I was like, no, I really need a Holter monitor or a stress test. And they did, and they found AFib. And I had surgery 3 weeks ago. And if I hadn't been diligent in that awareness of my body, then I could have missed that, and I might not be here today. I don't know that answer, but yeah, it's self-compassion and self-awareness as much as possible. And that's it.
So there's a lot going on in on the feed. And do we have a better term than self-care? That's not an easy. I know that's not an easy. Is there some other way we could phrase that? And Lena, I'm going back to your social justice, and I'm also watching the feed. That Jess has some pretty good questions here about, it's so overdone that her comment is that it's put more distance and hierarchy between people and the things we need to feel good. So much about the term self-care implies money and consumption. And there's another post on here, and let me just scroll down, and I think it's from Jess, because it just reminded me that I feel my best. And I know this will sound weird to some people, but I don't think for anybody who works the way with the public health issue we all do in suicide, but I'm at my best, energy levels, no matter what else has been going on, when I'm working with someone who needs help, whether it's going to bat for them, and having to help advocate for them, to see how someone is treated. And I really, and some stuff came across my desk this week that I was having hissy fits left and right, which is not my usual state of affairs, but because of the outrageous injustice of it. And it was like, how can this be happening? How can this be happening today? And unfortunately, I say that too often, but I'm just going to go, Lauren, I'm going to come back to you. What else can we call this?
Besides self-care?
Yeah. How do we better describe it? Does it need?
For me, like, the way that I kind of view my self-care is more along the lines of self-healing and self-transformation. I think self-care has a connotation of like bubble baths and like manicures, and that's not to say that it can't be that, but for me personally, it's deeper. It's like, this is what I'm doing to actually heal myself from the inside out, and to truly give myself what it is that I need, to be kind of present and productive in the world. So, I mean, self-care for me is kind of like healthcare. You know what I mean? Like, it's my form of healthcare. It's what I do. It's proactive. It's preventive. It's it's what I do every day. It's like the choices that I make to make sure that I'm healthy physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yep. And I think that is a common thread that at least that's what I heard between the three of you, that it isn't just about that. And it's almost like it's to do that, then we are able to step forward and be of service to others.
Exactly.
And,
Exactly.
it's,
yeah, because it's like you can't give from an empty tank.
right.
You know, like people think it's selfish, but like it's really not, because you have to be full of you have to be full yourself so that you can give to others.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Okay. Then we're on the same. Yeah. Kim Johnson, who is the author of our children's book series that we use for upstream work in social emotional learning, is always talking about she's a personal coach, and she's always talking about the oxygen mask axiom. When those suckers come down, you're supposed to put it on yourself first.
Right.
So that, not in a selfish way, but in a self-caring way of others, that then you can be of help to someone else. And that's kind of the form. But I have to agree. I hate it when there's a term and that's the only thing we can use, even though many of us go, I wish we didn't have to use that term. Lena, I'm going to jump over to you. What are your thoughts on that?
Let's see. I'm going to return to, for me, self-care really does mean advocating for myself. It really means caring for myself. I completely agree. I think the term self-care, the way that we use it, is rooted in consumerism, and it's not equitable. And the way that we frame it means a lot of people don't have access to self-care. And what is that saying to people if we're saying do self-care, but someone says, well, the self-care you're talking about, I don't have access to. Yeah. How am I going to get better if I can't do this thing? Or what's my worth if I don't have access to this thing that you're telling me to do? I think that's a really important thing we need to look at. I would like to live in a world or a society where everyone really does have access to self-care as we conceive of it. I think knowing that it's a problematic word is important. It's important for us when we're talking about it as survivors. It's important for those of us who work in suicide prevention or mental health or social justice, whatever it is, to just be aware that the word is really complicated, and to be aware of how we're using it, and to continue to push back on the term.
So I'm throwing this out to everybody on the chat. Let's find a better word. Let's find a better description. Do we need a description? I guess because in essence, I'm agreeing with everybody that it's what we just naturally do. But for me, I also suffered from that point when I didn't know how to do that. Mm-hmm. And I did need someone to help describe that, because when I came out of the abuse, I was lucky if I could tie my shoes. And that was going from the A+ student with a 4-year scholarship. And I was non-functional from the abuse. And it took me a long time to heal. And I didn't know, I honestly didn't know anymore what was appropriate and what wasn't. And I sort of found my own way, because self-care to me also is not about, but it is about being contemplative. I do step back and I need that space and that quiet, and I'm perfectly okay with that. But I also do my best when I am connecting with other people. There's that human quality and that empathy. Steph, I'm coming back to you. Any new thoughts on this?
Wow, this is when it's hard to be third, because you guys really have nailed it. I'm not sure. We're a society that likes to put labels on things, and this is one of those.
Yep.
One of those things. I look at self-care. I mean, it gets back to what I said earlier. It's like that self-compassion. It does look. It's interesting. Words sometimes get caught up in meaning, and you think about the word habits, and generally our brains go to bad habits, but then there's things like healthy habits, like brushing your teeth every day, hopefully twice a day with floss, as my dentist would say. But that's a healthy habit. And I think if we're going to look at that concept of self-care, maybe it's broadening that definition and saying self-care doesn't have to be complicated. Yeah, the bubble baths are nice, but not everybody has that bathtub. So what does that mean for you? And, it could mean having a cup of tea in the middle of the afternoon if that's a hard time of day for you. It could mean stepping outside. I saw a comment earlier on just getting a deep breath of air. And it's, I think, an individual thing, when we sit there and say, well, it has to look like this or it has to look like that. And I always say, like, this is what it looks like for me, and it could look very differently for you. So, and that gets back into self-compassion and figuring out what works for you in terms of you being the best self you can be in that moment.
Yeah, I was just reading some of the other comments. Wow, what a discussion going on out there. I wish I would get better at following it while it's happening. So it's almost time for final thoughts. It can't be.
Wow.
Yeah. I guess, and I have to thank our Twitter feed that it's the word care that I think I'm getting hung up on right now tonight. It's now that it's been brought to my attention that, and that's why I love this. I love this process, and I have always loved this chat because I always walked away with, usually, I should say, most of the time I walked away with really feeling like the door had been opened just a little bit more about any particular topic. So I will ask, as we come back and do another round, not necessarily your final thoughts, but what would you hope are the takeaways? How do we change this? What are the steps? We have a lot of great people on the chat, so I'm throwing that out to you there. I know it's not a question that's coming out on the feed, but then if self-care is not an appropriate term, let's find what should we call this? And a couple of, and you've mentioned it too. Everybody has. I'm just stuck. I just feel that we have to find a better way. But that's when we had Jess and Pata and Jen Kelleher on for the social justice, it was like I walked away with my head spinning about language, and about doing other things that I am continuing to learn for. We had Lisa Morgan on and listening to talk about, it's the labels. Stephanie, you're right. We just love labels. Listening to Lisa Morgan talk about suicide and autism and the struggle of people on the autism spectrum trying to make that call for crisis, and how important it is to undo our blocked eyes and ears in communication. It comes to the same way. We label things, and we need to, I don't know, maybe that's it. Let's take the labels off, but then how do we communicate? We need another word. Lauren, I'm coming back to you. Trace?
Something that I've kind of called my self-care program before is like a wellness plan.
Yeah.
I think whatever we call it, I think that, I think everybody could benefit from a wellness plan, right?
Yep.
So it's like, how do you, what are the actions that you're going to engage in? What are you going to do every day or every week, or when you're feeling a certain way? Like, what's your plan so that you stay well and stay healthy? I think everybody needs to have one of those. Okay, let's see. Trace?
Oh yeah, when I think of like coping skills or whatever, that's like, to me, that's like, that was conditioned from when I was getting treatment. Like I'm conditioned to hear that word, coping skills.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Jess is right. It is a little like out there. Do you know what I mean? To have that as for a term, and I was thinking that I prefer the term personal wellness. because it is my wellness and it's my personal wellness. It's what I use. It's what I use for me to help me stay well and the things that I need to do in order for me to move forward with my life, you know, and I would think that because of everybody is different and different things work for everybody, you know, so I like personal wellness myself. I mean, if you have to put a label on it, I personally don't like labels, you know, I mean, you know, I don't want to walk around, you know, with it on my head saying personal wellness. I'm doing personal wellness today.
Right.
You know what I mean? You know, but I mean, just to put that out there, that's what I think, and I just wanted to add to that.
No. Lena, I'm coming back to you.
Yeah, I think I'm always reluctant to just find a new term for something and hope that all the connotations go away and that the structure magically changes if we just rename something.
Yeah, no.
So if we choose a new word for something, I think it has to be intentional and mean something different. If it means the same thing and it's a different word, I don't think we're changing anything. We're just pushing the problem further into open territory. So I think really becoming comfortable with the discomfort of what does self-care mean in our society, how do we use it? I think we have to acknowledge that. If it means something different, then it makes sense to use a different term. But if we continue to frame self-care as a consumer's model, then I think renaming it doesn't really address any of the problems that people are bringing up.
No, it doesn't. Yep, you're absolutely right. See, that's why I have the three of you over there. All right, so now we really seriously are at final thoughts. So, Trace, do you have anything you want to throw in for final thoughts, hon?
No. I just wanted to, you know, say that about the personal wellness and stuff.
Important, yeah.
You know, like to each his own. You know, everyone's going to have different things, but the important key here is that we can all learn from one another. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe I learned something tonight from Lauren, you know, with what she uses, something different that she uses, you know what I mean? And, you know, maybe that might work for me. And then again, maybe it won't. That's because we're all different, you know, but the thing is that we're all sharing what makes us feel better and how we get to the other side of continuing to move forward in our lives. And I think that's really the key here.
Okay. No, good point, because the title of this was self-care after a suicidal crisis. And in this case, the loss of someone that we loved and cared about. Because I remember my first conversation with you, Steph, when we were on the phone, and you said, and I bet you want to know what the self-care, what we have for support resources. And I went, yeah. And she said, yeah, none. And so I guess that's the other thing too, is that it wraps into, well, what are the resources for someone to be able to find a way, and how can we do a better job of making it accessible and attainable? So thanks, Trace. Personal wellness, that's where I'm going for the moment anyway. Lauren, final thoughts. What do you want the takeaways to be?
I would say, number one, you know, speaking from experience, there is life after suicide loss. There is life after depression. There is hope after devastation, which if you had talked to me like 8 years ago, right after my mom passed, I probably would not have said that. Mm-hmm. But, you know, being 8 years out and kind of having moved through the various stages and the various emotions and sort of gotten to a better place, there is life after that kind of tragedy. I would say, you know, you can take your well-being into your own hands to a large degree, and that's not to say you can't get outside help, but there's so many things you can do every single day many of them free of charge, that can radically transform your life. And I think the final thing I would say, and I tweeted this earlier, but every single choice you make regarding diet and lifestyle is a vote for how you want to feel in the future. So just keep that in mind and choose wisely.
And Stephanie, I'm sure you're saying, Emery, that means get rid of your Diet Coke and drink more water.
Yes.
Yeah, well, the good news is I'm getting there. I'm drinking a lot more water, not getting rid of the Diet Coke. Lena, I'll ask you one more time. Final thoughts. What are the takeaways? What would you like someone to take away from tonight?
Yeah. I think kind of coming back to what I talked to in the beginning about what do I do to take care of myself, moving away from the term self-care, I think kind of returning to acknowledge that being a survivor of various sorts is hard. It's hard to live in my mind, my body as a survivor of suicide loss. And there are things I need to do to be able to survive. And whether that's sleep hygiene, whether it's being able to get outside, whether it's sometimes isolating myself, whether it's sometimes seeing friends, whatever it is, that I'm doing what's right for me to survive, and acknowledging and privileging my own agency and my own needs. At the end of the day, I think that's what I need, and being okay with intersects with self-care, but it's not the exact same thing. Holding space for what does Lena need to do to survive this pain, and allowing myself to do those things.
Nice thoughts. Thank you. Stephanie, I'm back to you.
I'm gonna again ditto on all of you. You have such great insight. I really think that it's such an individual pathway that we need to figure out for ourselves after traumatic loss. The one thing I will say that I had to learn how to do was ask for help. And sometimes sometimes I see on Facebook when people say, hey, what are your thoughts on this? Or what are your thoughts on that? And I think that peer support, the people who are fresh from a traumatic loss don't necessarily, or like what you said, like after Jesse and Bella died, I never thought I could be happy again. And here I am 5 years out, and I hold both grief and joy. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where peer support groups can be helpful in instances like this after traumatic loss, because you can have an opportunity to share what works for you. It doesn't necessarily, like you said, Tracy, doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody, but a lot of times, like having a conversation like this brings us to the table and says, wow, I never even thought of doing that before. And whether we keep self-care, whether we trash it, whatever, but like, it is a wellness. It is a personal wellness program, and each and every person's looks differently, and honoring that, because, I can't sit there and judge what works for you. I got to look at my own mirror and take care of myself.
Good point. So in wrapping up, and it's interesting that you referred to the peer-to-peer, because I am so passionate about that. I look back at those early days, what seems like early days now, 5 years ago, when Tracy and I sat around the table with a group of attempt survivors, and each so different, so unique. And no one tried to persuade the other to do what they were doing. There was incredible mutual respect about just listening and allowing each person to share what their wellness path was. And that's what we were calling it, the path to wellness and healing. And everybody did it differently. Some did it with art, some did it with photography, some did it with writing, others were more athletic about things. And that peer-to-peer exchange, it was just awesome. So maybe that's where part of our solution is, just a continuing, particularly when we're talking about lived experience. As an impacted family member, I walk away with a mixture of joy and sadness every time we have an opportunity to see someone at our table smile and let go just a little bit of the fear. And I sit at a grief table, a grief support table once a month, and just to see someone be able to crack a smile through the tears, just saying that and knowing that that they're walking out feeling just a little bit better. And I think that's what this is all about. What are we doing to take care of ourselves? Not about self-care, but taking care of ourselves so we do feel better. Life is meant to be lived, and it's important. We spend so much time on that word prevention that I wish I could trash it sometimes and talk about a little bit more about how do we improve the quality of life in general. And I guess that's where, and that probably, now that I said it out loud, that's what motivated me when I left the violence to do what I needed to do, because I knew that wasn't how life was supposed to be, and it was about improving the quality of my life. And maybe that's a little blanket we can wrap this whole conversation around. How can I improve the quality of my life? And then more importantly, it's of no value if I'm not willing to share that with someone else. They don't have to embrace it, they don't have to absorb it, but it's about constantly sharing that with some other member who is an impacted family member or a loss survivor, or an attempt survivor. So gosh, you guys have given me a lot to think about, and I thank you for that. I thank you for that. I thank you all for your honesty and your openness, and the incredible mutual respect of the differences of viewpoints. And I hope that we can carry that through the night. So everybody, it's a wrap. We are done for another week, and we'll see you next Sunday. Hope your week goes well. And if it doesn't, then I hope you find a path to be able to balance it with. And I really do hope you have some folks around you who can give you a hand. And even, I always say, just shut up and just walk with them. You don't fix it. We don't fix things. I thank you all. You all rock. All right. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Good night.
Thank you.